Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming and for your patience. I did not realize I would be struggling with the technical bits at the start of this, but I suppose that's how it always goes. I am told that we have audio working as well from anything potentially making sounds from the slides, so I'm just gonna wait for you to get it up there, or how does that happen? I think that was a hand signal. Ah, look at that. All right, and I have a clicker that I'm wildly unfamiliar with, so it's gonna be exciting. Hi, welcome to my talk. Merging Rhythm and FPS is a desperate title I came up with in the middle of the night when I remembered I had to send in some info for a certain date. So we'll see if that's what you feel like it was about in the end. I am going to give you an outline of what I'm going to be talking about today, but I will be spending a little time introducing myself first. I am Milla Isaksson. I'm here walking a dog, probably. This is the place I work at. I'm a lead designer at The Outsiders, a Funcom studio, where I coordinate a small team of designers. Featured on the floor here is our lead combat designer, Adam, killed by something I said, presumably. Studied and got my bachelor's in game design and scripting. During my studies, I helped Arrowhead with some additional writing for Gauntlet, and I've also worked at Paradox Interactive as a content designer for various grand strategy games, including Crusader Kings 3. But now, and as of the past 3 years, I have been working on Metal Hellsinger, the, feels weird to say, award-winning rhythm shooter that came out last year. At our studio, I am involved in a lot of different gameplay and design areas on the project. I consider myself something of an organized scatterbrain, and my colleagues know that I'm into spreadsheets and numbers and formulas that confirm my theories about set numbers. I also do systems on the game economy, balancing, and I write a lot of the words that go into the game, mainly anything player onboarding, but also some flavor text and stuff. We're not a huge team, so people tend to wear several hats. And this is me as a kid, playing solitaire on my aunt's computer for hours on end during a family gathering, because winning meant that the cards would start jumping around, and that was just about the coolest thing I had ever seen. It started early, chasing that high. But yeah, I'm sharing this because I want to talk a little about before my career began, briefly. Because I was a high school dropout, and I failed math, because I would rather be writing songs. And after a couple of stray jobs, I caught up on my studies a bit, and I got into game development around my late 20s, I say. I'm sharing this because I think that there's this idea that in order to be successful or even survive in this industry, you have to have this all-consuming passion for games your entire life, and you have to be familiar with every single game in the universe. And I think that's nonsense. Having the financial means to grow up with games and consoles, or the opportunity to be able to study game development at an actual school at some point in life, it's a privilege. And I think it's good to acknowledge that so that things can change, you know. Part about some stuff that's in this talk is about having a background outside of games and how that has helped me in my current job. So yeah, have different backgrounds. I think it makes for better games. Now, I'm doing double clicking, it's a little confusing. What is this talk about? I'm going to start by describing Metal Hellsinger, for those of you who might not be familiar with the game. I haven't been to a meetup like this since before the pandemic, so I'm not actually sure how many people have even heard about it. And then I'm going to talk a little about my experiences and some of the challenges we've encountered while working on this game, this rhythm shooter, and I'll do that through a couple of themes. And hopefully each theme will have a learning that seems relevant. And then we'll do some Q&A. And some expectation management. One disclaimer is that while I'm highly aware that the most recent games I've had the pleasure of working on have done really well for themselves with overwhelmingly positive Steam reviews, I don't think I am magic. Many of the learnings I'm going to be presenting have, I mean, they're my learnings. They're based on my mistakes. And that's how I'm able to package them this way for you, like advice and a little bit of nostalgia for me. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to do so. I don't think I'm done learning my craft, and this talk, like writing this talk, has really forced me to go back and think about my own process and progress over the past few years. So it's meant a lot. Thank you. And who are you as an expectation thing? You are curious about music as a component of gameplay. If you are already working on a rhythm game of any kind, is there feedback in this one? Then these takeaways are perhaps not going to blow your mind, but I'm hoping you'll stay for the anecdotes. On the other hand, if you are just curious or thinking about starting up a project like this, I might have some stuff that's going to interest you. So, without further ado, I'm going to see if this video loads. This is Metal Hellsinger. Do we have sound? Little bit of sound? It's a 3-minute video, it's fine. Oh, I hear it. I think the volume might be low with the video too. Aha. Yeah. So, your ability to shoot on the beat will enhance your gameplay experience. The more in sync you are with the rhythm, the more intense the music becomes. It builds her multiplier in the top, adding more instruments and stuff. The more destruction you will also wreak because you deal more damage. In more detail, the game consists of a linear campaign. This is one of the levels. I wasn't sure about if I was going to be able to stream a video from YouTube, so a colleague sent me this like an hour ago. He's very good at the game. Very cool. All right, thank you. It's a little intense watching that. I can't concentrate. But yeah, one of the important things I want you to note was the multiplier at the top of the screen. That one is a Fury multiplier. And here we have listed some of the game mechanics, really. I don't know how much I'm going to talk about them. But yeah, multiplier goes up. Yes, that's important. And at 16x, the music reaches its full arrangement, and you get to hear the vocals. So that is musical reward number 1. The campaign levels are also set up in a way that lets sections of the song play out to the level as the player progresses. So that parts... wait. Whoops. Okay. So that parts of the music remain the same as well. If you're standing stationary in a spot, you will be hearing the same music loop over and over until you are able to move on to the next part of the level and thus song. It's like a musical progression along with your progression, which I think is pretty cool. And my first topic, really, do you have to be a musician to work on a game like this? And the maybe pretty intuitive answer is no, but it helps. There's a lot of technical jargon within music theory as a field. It's its whole own thing, it turns out. And I'm sure it would have been great if everyone at our studio could have had all of that information uploaded into our brains, matrix style, at the start of the project. And yeah, we having a common language and terminology for the stuff you're working on is naturally going to be good. for communication. And we do still try to have a consistent language for the stuff we're working on. And we do still struggle sometimes on that note. No pun intended. Now, personally, I am not a classically trained musician, but I had some piano lessons in my childhood, and I do have a rough understanding of how to read sheet music. I'm also a decent campfire guitarist, and I can read tablature if I have to. However, I don't think I ever expected to be able to, or even have to, talk about things like beats and measures, time signatures, as it related to my game design work. And still, that ended up being one of the first things for me to do on the job, to ask cautious questions to our brilliant audio team about which aspects of the tracks that they had made meshed really well with our game, and which parts were maybe more difficult to convey intuitively to the player. And I want to tell you a story. It is based on an example I was reminded of myself recently. Thank you, Niklas of Two Feathers, the composers and audio designers of our game. We had a section in one of the earlier songs, as in one of the levels of the main campaign of our game, where in a certain crypt, I think it was, the music went into this really cool and syncopated beat, like a interesting bridge riff, you know. And it was atmospheric and it was dark and it really fit the level environment too. But as I was hosting a small playtest with friends, essentially, it was revealed that it was really hard for players to beat match during this particular space. And I had a feeling it was because of the variation in rhythm. And if you don't know what a syncopated beat is, it is basically the unexpected in-between beat in an otherwise predictable sequence. So this means that the main beat that you are still visually and clearly according to the game supposed to match to, it becomes weaker, if that makes sense. And I'm going to try to demonstrate this, which we'll see how it goes. I might regret this. Microphone. So you have a beat, right? And you have a beat and a melody. This is where you're firing your weapon. And then you add another beat like this. Wait, I'm doing it wrong. So, mindfuckery. Another beat. And then you fade the main part out. And it's gonna be pretty hard to beat match to the pauses in between, right? Like that one is gone. And you can't, as a player, if you're not into music or you're listening to the music to keep the beat, that's gonna trip you up almost every time. And it was consistent across the playtest. So it was clear that something like that has to be designed for. You gotta be careful with cool bridges and shit in your original soundtrack. So after talking to Niklas, one of our composers, they changed it. And turns out our playtesters did not struggle anymore. So what can we learn? Having ways to communicate about music and music theory is great. I honestly don't know if I would have been able to pinpoint the issue I was just describing without having experience writing music myself. I suspect that I or someone else would have gotten there, but I think it would have been slower. So yes, I think it helps. I don't want that to be disheartening though, because I suspect this is the case in a bunch of other games where some kind of pre-existing knowledge exists. Again, with any theme, I suppose. When I worked on historical strategy games, there was a load of terminology to pick up on too. But for the individual developer, the problem, I think, is rarely a lack of information. It is learning how to parse that information and talk about it. How to put a sequence of beats and different intervals into words that make sense to you, but also to your colleague. And you're probably going to have to do it in text too. So to be able to do that, you need to know what a beat is across all disciplines. Maybe have a conversation about what is a measure in music and in our game. Are they different? And otherwise, coders, I love coders, but they're gonna name shit whatever. And that's gonna haunt you. I am never getting over the fact that we actually have something in the game, not player-facing, mind, it's only in the editor, so only for me, that's called a melody. And it's not a melody. And I think it just sounded, excuse me, it sounded good probably that one day when a designer came up with it. We didn't know how many music words we were going to need. It's a lot of them, turns out. More practically, in addition to talking about it, having meetings where you do what I did or try to do, drumming on yourself, that is good for you. Other than that, I would recommend internal glossaries if you have the resources to put them together. Just a file with the most common words you're going to be using, what they mean in the game, and maybe within the field of music or whatever other scientific field that you're working with. I actually have several glossaries of my own, mostly for my own sake. But don't underestimate your teammates either. I know our combat designer, the one you saw on the floor, he started out on this project with no prior knowledge to music, and he has learned a lot. I think he had to, but it kind of happened while I wasn't watching. It's been really cool to see. For instance, each weapon in the game fires to its own rhythm sequence, and he spent a lot of time setting them up. He recently asked me for advice on one of the DLC weapons we released, and I fell down a deep rabbit hole trying to figure it out and make it cool. Music is hard. But anything can be learned, so, take a course, read a book. Let's check how we are on time. All right, how do you visualize the passing of time? So music theory aside, how do you make the player understand that they have to care about the passing of time, moment to moment? A lot of rhythm games use some kind of scrolling UI that, with some blips in it, something to signal when your input needs to happen. Examples that pop into my head are Guitar Hero. There's a note highway, I think they call it, with gems for your fingers. And Beat Saber, the VR game, also has highway-looking UI that comes at you, moving you along the path of the music. In Dance Dance Revolution, there are arrows that float, is it upwards, I think? They scroll upwards until they hit something, and you're supposed to press stuff. Crypt of the Necrodancer, very fun game. Uses similar thing that we do in Hellsinger, except they have it at the bottom of the screen, so it's a little out of the way. And I haven't played Hi-Fi Rush, but I really want to. And I saw that they have this very clear, for me, left to right visualization of it, I guess. It doesn't appear anywhere else in the game, it seems. They just, to teach you, you have to be very clear about what is time. Here are some other people struggling to visualize time and music and rhythm. In Hellsinger, we have tried having the rhythm indicator in different places, like the top of the screen, the argument being that not everyone wants to see it or look at it, myself included. I prefer it out of the way. And I think most players, even the ones that don't, they wouldn't say they have a sense of rhythm. Even those players kind of find a way to keep the beat, whether it's tapping your foot or bobbing your head. I see this on streams. So. But in the end, we are working with a very fast-paced shooter. Anything that we put in the peripheral of the screen is going to be either missed or forgotten about. So we have chosen to have it in the middle of the screen anyway. It hugs the reticle, and it seems to be the most appreciated choice. Matching the beat being such a requirement for player enjoyment in Hellsinger. If the visual is what you are listening to, if the visual is what is letting you stay on beat, then yeah, it should be smack in the middle of things for you. And yes, there are people who turn it off completely, but we have made that an optional setting. So, I seem to have copied my notes weirdly. What can we learn? In general, you can have something coming at you or closing in on something. The placement depends on what other stuff you need to have in your game. What the other player needs to pay attention to, essentially. That isn't the music and the passing of time and the beat matching. Like what is pressure-inducing, I guess. The more legible and readable, like the Hi-Fi Rush example I had, that seems for me, as a Westerner, I guess, reserved for more or less hectic gameplay, like playing the ocarina, maybe, where time is not of the essence, so to speak. And I think that, yeah, visualizing time ultimately depends on what other genre you're working in and other frameworks. If you told me you're working on a rhythm management game, I would advise maybe against having it in the prime real estate that is the middle of the screen. And I cannot finish this topic without giving a shout out to Maria, our UI lead. Thank you for everything you do. How much on beat is enough, though? In our game, you don't technically have to be on beat, but it really helps. It does indirect and some indirect ways that I've described affect your fury multiplier, which affects everything. There's also a question of how much of what the player can see and hear at any given time outside of the rhythm indicator and the beat, the main beat of the game. How much of that should the player have to focus on, really? How much of it should be moving and existing to the beat? In Hellsinger, we want the beat to feel a bit omnipresent, so it should be everywhere, but it also kind of can't because it's a fast-paced shooter. If you had, I mean, we could have it in the hood. I don't think we do. Anyway, I shouldn't say that. Because the beat can be present in everything. Yeah, in the world, in enemy animations, weapon VFX, environment objects, in the HUD, player resources like health, ultimate power, score, numbers. We need to make sure that player can still understand what is happening, though, with enemies, that they have to be able to read incoming attacks. Very important. So a thing like dancing enemies. Sounds fun, sounds great. Almost logical for a game that deals with music and rhythm. But in a hectic fight, that becomes impossible to move around and read, and no. I proceed with caution visually. The sound is supposed to be your guide and help you, not hinder you. When it comes to the gameplay, we also have some actions that you're allowed to do offbeat. One is a core movement action, jumping. You can jump without caring about any of the beat. I've thought about giving a bonus for it, but it doesn't strike me as something we need or that elevates the player traversal, really. Not better than our dashing mechanic does already. And dashing can also be combined with a jump, and then you can soar and like do a sweet double jump thing. It's very good, and I think that's enough beat action for the controls, really, movement controls. You can also attack an enemy off beat and still damage them. It does not deal as much damage as it would have otherwise, and you might lose a little fury, the multiplier at the top, from it, but you can do it. We don't want to make it unplayable for you in that situation. Although we did have a failure SFX once upon a time that was very intrusive. And we've tried different versions of it, but it was a very loud kdunk, feeling like you dropped your guitar, really. And it felt like the game, like while it was really clear, it felt like the game was telling you that you suck. And we don't want that, so it's been toned down. But it is a balance to bear in mind. If the player performs this action off beat, how much worse should that be? Because in general, we want to encourage beat behavior, on-beat behavior, and we want the game world to enhance that. And we want to be rewarding skilled players and not really punishing the players that aren't as skilled, maybe. So, what can we learn? Well, it feels a little silly almost. What I find most important when looking for answers to stuff like this is to remember the core vision of your game. That's where it ends up. So basically the game direction, and as a team member being able to prioritize based on that. In our case, I think at least I initially hesitated a little on the rhythm part of the design, while the shooter part of the game was pretty good. And the reason for that caution is straight up that it's scary making something new. Something that you immediately know is going to be challenging for players, and not knowing which part is going to be the challenging one, the FPS or the rhythm part. Do they have to be great at both? But knowing your vision is going to help you. And I mean like the one sentence mission statement, the baseline of a concept. Are you making an action game with rhythm component, or are you making a rhythm game with an action component? Those mean very different things, and the further into development you get, the worse the consequences are going to be if you get it wrong. If it feels unclear, ask. And a month later, ask again. How do you take a break when the show must go on? This is my favorite title. I can apply it to so many things. So part of our equation is that metal as a genre of music is intense. And an FPS can also be pretty intense. So I think a game like Metal Hellsinger requires your full attention constantly almost. Before release, we were honestly not sure what to expect from players when it came to, say, streaming. Was it going to be remotely fun to watch someone sit in deep concentration, not being able to engage with their audience for 20 minutes until they clear a level? Because that is happening. That's what they look like. And at the same time, it is very comforting to see that that is exactly what we look like as developers when we're testing our stuff. Whenever you're done with the level, it's just a big exhale. You're like, oh, I need a break. So, yeah, that's what one guy looks like. Very pleased. Like, it's fucking over. So our job is to balance action and player fatigue. That's my next topic, yeah. Or, I mean, I already put it on the screen now. But we have some, what I would call natural breaks in the gameplay. Encounter clearing is one of them. You have, because it's a little like in Zelda, you walk into an encounter space and the door closes behind you and you're trapped. You have to kill everything in there. And once you do that, the gate opens and you can actually kind of take your time at first, is how we had it. But we realized that because there was nothing really pushing you on, it messed with the other mechanics we had. Like the Fury multiplier, it drops down over time. So if you don't have anything you're going after on a beat, your performance is gonna drop basically. And I can't believe I'm referencing this, but you know that Jason Statham movie where he has to keep his heartbeat above a certain threshold or he'll explode or whatever. That's a little what Hellsinger sometimes feel like one variable tweak away from being, and also it can't be because that's very stressful. So while a break is welcome, we don't want players to completely lose any sense of urgency, and it's just a pacing problem. It's hard. But we have tried to tackle it a few ways. And one part of it is the rhythm weapon, the skull weapon, PAS we call them. It's the only weapon that increases the fury if used on beat without a target. You don't have to actually connect your attacks to an enemy. And that way you can keep the multiplier still going a bit when you risk it running low. We also added pickups, fury boosts, that you can pick up to get an instant push when you enter a new arena. In spite of these changes, though, we still had some players who would walk around kind of aimlessly in between encounters. Because now they can just keep the multiplier up by rocking with that one weapon. And it meant that there was nothing urgently important in the next level space. They could just go around looking for items they left behind or something. It's not really the gameplay we wanted. So we added time pressure in the form of a score badge, which is something that we apply after you're clearing a level, you can get a bonus for speed. You can even get malice, negative points if you're really slow. And I think that seems to have done the trick, really. The downside of limited room for breaks, I could talk a lot more about, but we're on a schedule, so I can mention that from an artistic perspective, we have some beautiful vistas that are not allowed to shine, really, because it's not a game where you stop and smell the pyramids. We also have resurrections, naturally, where you... we talked about having it the way it's all... I keep mentioning Zelda now, but you just pop back up immediately, and you're back into the action. But we found that it was pretty much... Everyone preferred when you could actually take a break yourself and choose actively to get back up. So you have some agency of how many breaths you're allowed to take. Another thing is level endings, of course. Killing a boss. After that, you're thrown into the next hell, or at least a loading screen. And you can go to the main menu, maybe take an actual coffee break or play some tournaments, which are arena challenges. And yeah, so that was obvious. But what can we learn? Breaks need to be intentional. That's about it, really. It's one statement. And a lot of breaks in any game that might seem natural or logical, but it's not something you can really take for granted in a game like this. Like pausing a game, bringing up a pause menu, pretty good convention. Oh, not in this game. We had debates. But the game, the moment-to-moment gameplay, tied to passing of time, you need to evaluate how those moments actually fit into the rest of the game, and how to pivot if they don't. How to get the player to follow your beat. Hellsinger is not a text-heavy game, and we never wanted it to be. But there are words in there. Now, before I start this one, I want to preface that there's a difference between different types of text in a game. I'm not going to be talking about the narrative part so much, but the words that, everything else. It might be connected to the lore of the game, but its primary purpose is really to guide the player, to keep them informed about the game state, and finally, make them feel at home, like the world makes sense. For this, the text needs to be mechanically correct. It needs to be succinct and to the point. It's a bonus if it's cohesive and consistent with the rest of the game. And it's my job to make sure that the player knows where to access this text if they need it later. And it's an art to making UX. There's a UX art, I'm mixing up the sentence, but writing is hard. Words are hard. We take it for granted almost sometimes. If an instruction is the length of a tweet, it's probably too long. And the large number of players will not read it. Especially those who come into the game believing that they already know how to play this game because of the trickery we have going on with, familiar visual components, a crosshair, health bar. Must play like most shooters, right? No. I've personally worked a lot on the onboarding experience of our game, and for context, the last project I helped design the onboarding of was Crusader Kings 3, which is very different. And I can only describe it as very text-heavy. If you want to play CK3 and be good at it, as in understand what is happening to you, you have to do a lot of reading, and you have a lot of patience to go through. And I forgot to change the slide. Instead, this is my original concept for our tutorial. Very simple in comparison. And I thought it would be easy. But yeah, so I started this problem for a bit, like, we need to inform the player that this isn't a regular shooter. I stared at it maybe for a day, and before admitting, we need to have text. We need game terms, we need a vocabulary to talk to our player. We need to write some instructions. And we have loading screens and loading tips, and they're very helpful. But when you're working on a game using less clearly established conventions, I think the challenge of telling the player what to do and how to do it well just can't be done with loading tips alone. You need more and verbal guidance, I think. So yeah, let's get some text in there and hope that it's possible for the player to even pay attention to. And it brings me back to an earlier topic of pauses and how they need to be so damn intentional. That the onboarding text should pause our game. I don't have a picture of it now, I'm afraid, but we have instruction prompts that appear, basically, and pause the game. And the fact that they would, that was not an easy sell internally. I didn't even like it myself much. But I am very grateful to all of my friends who playtested with me during the pandemic, because it turned out to be invaluable to us. And even the players who self-report, I hate reading, they do read eventually. They just need to get stuck first. And what happens then is usually that they do so on their own time, simply put. One of them said, I want to go looking in the menus myself, because that's agency. Then he got to do that. They're learning on their own terms, and that's fine. Like I said, I just need to make sure they know where to look. So we have a small in-game database called the Compendium of important game concepts. There's also a bestiary, and both of them are available for the player to peruse at their own leisure. And when it comes to onboarding in general, we also have the shorter arena challenges that I talked about outside of the main campaign, the torments. They focus on one or a few game mechanics at a time, and they double both as onboarding and skill honing. And you can unlock stuff in there. So bring stuff out of there to make the game easier in other places. Yeah, I like it. So, what can we learn? Breaks still need to be intentional. Don't count on players reading the words just because they're on your screen. Consider a glossary for the player. And playtest, playtest, playtest. Shocking no one, I know. Oh, when the player can't march to your drum. It's a little related. So latency is a challenge, always going to be. And at some point you kind of have to accept that there are going to be players who it won't be good for them. Like disregarding their setup, your audio calibration, and there are going to be stuff that makes it not great for certain people for some reason. And it's hardware issues, it's wireless headset, everything. Anyway. But especially frustrating is, though, the generally skilled player struggling with the rhythmic aspect of the game. And we have to accommodate for them, regardless of whether that's due to their sense of rhythm being poor, or there's something technical going on. Because it's not a given that they want to turn down or even enter the game at a lower difficulty because they are bad at what looks like an FPS, basically. It could be that you just want to have an easier time with the beat matching. Or it's a technical issue. We don't know. Yet in a shooter, changing the difficulty can and probably should affect a bunch of stuff more than beat matching. So there's a balance to strike in who you're accommodating for. What if all your player was looking for was not to be off beat all the damn time? Well, of course, there are adjustments to be made there as well. The most obvious one being adjust the time window you have for hitting the beat. Sorry, I messed up the mic. And we had that for a while. What we ended up doing, though, was adjusting the time window for the perfect beat matched. And the overall time window is actually the same on all difficulties. I don't want to mess with that. It's a whole slew of problems. But this means that you should essentially be able to, at around the same frequency, be on beat in general on all the difficulty settings. But only really skilled players will be the ones getting the perfects. Inadvertently, though, if the beat matching was based on actual seconds, playing a slower song, this is a little technical, I struggled writing this out actually. A slower song could be harder to play if it's based on seconds, because it means you have to be more precise. Your relative time window for pulling off the on-beat input is bigger with a faster BPM. It's complicated. For a while, we had the Fury multiplier, the one that tracks your beat successes, basically. We had it drop or fade, the way it does, based on real time as well. And for the average player, this also made it easier to play well during faster songs. While the Fury went down at the same rate as before, because the BPM was faster, the player had more time, or really more beat matching opportunities to achieve success as they were coming at the player at a faster rate. It was basically a lot easier to keep the Fury multiplier high before it had time to drop. What can we learn from this? Consider your audience again, and who you want to be accommodating for. And unless you're planning to make the BPM of the music be tied to an indirect and pretty unintuitive, maybe difficulty change, tie your time-based modifiers to the BPM itself. In theory, our game could be played at 200 BPM, and it would still work. I know because I have tried it. And I wish I had a recording of it, but NDA. It's the same game though, but it's the same game, but it is so fast and hilarious. As long as I can keep it up and play the game scales. And it's just really cool, technically interesting, I think. And yeah, I have a bonus point because I had to cut some of this talk. Don't over-engineer your design. Yeah, I had a whole slide about how I've done that in the past, and you don't have to do that. I think it's the most common advice maybe among designers. So, or maybe it's just my own biggest advice, I don't know. It's easy to do. And then I managed to, let me see, oh yeah. Oh, it just says thank you. The 7 is gone, sorry. We go from 6 to 8. I want to give a shout out to my colleagues, my team. I love working with you and how you support me as well as challenge me and help me grow. I'm so proud of the work we're doing together. Okay, thank you. Hey, Q&A. No questions?
Merci. Yeah.
Oh.
Thank you for the talk. You mentioned the score. Yeah, here, sorry. You mentioned the being on beat adds on your score and multiplier, and etc. Did you have any other way to reward the player for being on beat?
Yes.
Yeah. And what would they be? And do they imply sound design?
Yes, I would say, because, well, basically everything goes through the Fury multiplier, which is the one at the top of the screen, like I keep describing, and all your inputs. Oh, this is a big one, actually. I try to gloss over it because it's a big one, but it affects. Because the Fury moves up, and that means that the arrangement of the song unlocks for every tier. So it goes from 1, 2, 4, 8, 16x, and for each of those layers, there's more happening in the music. And yeah, I think on I think that's the main part that's tied to audio. There's also visual components, like I think there are pyrotechnics happening on 16x when you're have performed well for a bit, and then I didn't include my spreadsheets about how the score is affected based on Fury level and beat grading. So if you're doing a perfect attack or a kill on 16x, it's pretty different from doing an offbeat one on the bottom tier. You also, I think, move a little faster at 16x. Don't know if that's secret or not.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I was thinking about Thumper, which is a weird rhythm game, but it does reward you with some score points, but also the sound design of the actions you can make in the game, like perfect turns and the perfect completion creates a track that is much more satisfying to the ear, but also there are very not musical noises. It's a weird game, but it's interesting they did that. If you only manage to do perfect turns, it sounds way better, and it's an interesting take they had in that.
Yeah, I feel like we would have experimented had we had more time. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. I want to talk about the challenges, you know. So I'm a huge fast FPS player, but I'm really bad at rhythm game because I don't manage to keep on the beat. But I thought the challenges are a great tutorial because when I started to play the game, I was less than 2% in Fury mode because I'm really bad. But after doing challenges, because I wanted to unlock, the skills, I really improved my game, and I think it was a genius idea to link, the upgrade of the character to the learning of the player, because it's really a good way to help the player to be better and to make him learn the game and not just brute force to the level and try to finish the game with a low skill level. And I want to know a bit more about how do you design that and how do you you come with this idea.
So how we designed the torments, really?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Over time. But we had 2 people working on those for a very long time, and they went through a bunch of iterations too. And it was very cool. I remember we had a playtest with, I think it was a French studio actually. We sent our game to, but like 2 years ago, and because the torment team, as we call it, had kind of been working not isolated, but I didn't have much interaction with them at the time at least before we started doing the sigils and incorporating the rewards from there. But it was very clear that early on, people loved playing the challenges. They were bite-sized and easy to understand in a way that the rest of the game maybe isn't. So we iterated on them a lot, and they've taken up a lot of time and work, but I think it's been very worth it. The one thing I would... Yeah. I have many thoughts. Maybe we can talk after. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the talk, very instructive. Concerning the last point about player not matching to your drum, in addition to the difficulty settings, what accessibility feature have you implemented or considered for less rhythmically proficient people?
We actually patched in very soon after release a bunch of settings aimed at accessibility. So in that one, we included always on rhythm mode, basically. So there's a toggle you can actually, if you try and you hate it and you still want to experience something, what the game is like, you can actually just go and check that box, and you should have an okay time, I think.
Okay, thanks you.
Hello, thanks for the talk. That was really interesting. We will agree on the fact that metal songs often have breaks and drum breaks. So, did you thought and did you implemented things to how can I say that, to just use those intense drumming moments to make it even more dynamic?
I feel like I'm gonna ask our Two Feathers, our design duo, about this later, because I haven't been much involved in the music composing myself.
Okay.
I don't think we had much in terms of drum fills. I know we have a very talented drummer playing on the game soundtrack. He's the drummer of Vola, otherwise, if you like that band. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to email you about that one, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. Very interesting. I was wondering in which measure enemy behavior and positioning were affected by players matching the beat or not.
I think the enemies are probably more on beat than the player. Yeah, I think there's not really. I think everything in the game world is kind of enhancing the beat. So if anything's off, it is you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much.
But over time, anyway, so. I'm waiting for a hand signal. We done? Yeah? Yeah. Hey! Thank you, everyone.